They thought I was finished, exiled on a forgotten island. But I returned. France knelt. The armies flocked to me. Europe trembled. And at Waterloo, I discovered that God, the weather, and fate itself had switched sides. This isn't the story of how I lost a battle. This is the story of how the world betrayed me. February 26th, 1815. Elba, a rock in the Mediterranean, where kings thought they could cage an eagle. I stood at the harbor as dawn broke, watching my guard, my pathetic guard of 400 loyal men, load the last of our supplies onto the ships. The British warship that was supposed to watch me had sailed away days earlier. Even my jailers had grown bored. They didn't understand. You don't exile destiny. You postpone it. My hands trembled as I gripped the railing. Not from fear, from rage, from illness, from the poison of inaction that had been eating me alive for 10 months. While I rotted on this island, Europe carved up my empire like vultures over a corpse. The Bourbons sat on France's throne again. Fat, useless, a return to everything we had bled to destroy. But France was calling. I could feel it in my bones. Letters smuggled from Paris whispered the truth. The people were restless. The soldiers missed their emperor. Louis XVI had learned nothing and forgotten nothing. He was already making the same mistakes that got his brother's head cut off. Your Majesty, Bertrand approached, his voice cautious. The wind is favorable, but if we fail, we won't fail. I turned to face him, and I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of doubt. Already. Do you know why? Because France doesn't want the Bourbons. They want glory. They want the dream we gave them. They want me. The crossing took 3 days. 3 days where British ships could have intercepted us. 3 days where a single frigate could have ended everything before it began. But the sea was empty. Even luck, it seemed, had not yet abandoned me. March 1st, we landed at Gulf Juan. 400 men against a kingdom. Mathematically impossible. Historically absurd. Exactly my style. We marched north, through the Alps, taking the mountain route to avoid the royalist strongholds on the coast. My body screamed with every step. My stomach twisted. My legs ached. My breath came short. I was 45 years old and felt 70. But I kept walking, because emperors don't rest. Then came the moment that changed everything. March 7th. Outside Grenoble. The 5th Regiment of the Line, sent by the king to arrest me, blocked the road ahead. 1,000 muskets. Professional soldiers. All I had were my guards and the few peasants who'd joined us along the way. I should have retreated, negotiated, found another route. Instead, I walked forward, alone. I could hear my officers hissing behind me. "Sire, what are you doing?" But I didn't stop. I walked directly toward those leveled muskets, my gray coat open, my hand resting near my heart. 50 meters, 40, 30. I could see their faces now. Young men, veterans, boys who'd bled for me at Jena, at Wagram, at Moscow. 20 meters. Their colonel shouted, "Ready, aim." 10 meters. I stopped, opened my coat wider, and I spoke, not shouted, but spoke, letting my voice carry across that terrible silence. "Soldiers of the 5th, I am your emperor. If any man wishes to kill his emperor, here I stand." The muskets wavered. I have returned to restore France, to save her from the kings who would chain her again. Who among you will fire first?" For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. The world held its breath. Then a single voice from the ranks. "Vive l'Empereur!" The dam broke. Muskets dropped. Men rushed forward, weeping, reaching for me, kneeling in the mud. Their colonel stood frozen, stunned, as his entire regiment dissolved into chaos. Not of mutiny, but of love. I felt it then, that old electricity, that current of destiny that had always pulled me forward. "To Paris!" I shouted, and 1,000 voices roared back. To Paris. From that moment, it became a legend. Every garrison sent to stop me joined me instead. Every city opened its gates. Marshal Ney, the bravest of the brave, was dispatched by Louis with 20,000 men and a promise to bring me back in an iron cage. When we met, he embraced me, wept. "I couldn't do it, sire. I couldn't." By March 20th, I entered Paris without firing a shot. Louis had fled in the night like a thief. The Tuileries Palace stood empty, waiting. I climbed those steps alone, my heart pounding. From exertion, from triumph, from disease, I couldn't tell anymore. France was mine again. The impossible had happened. But as I stood in the throne room, looking at the empty seat of power, I felt my hand shake, felt the cough rising in my chest, felt the weight of 45 years and 100 battles crushing down on my shoulders. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of my mind, a voice whispered what I refused to believe. "You are dying, Napoleon. And this time, destiny might not be enough." I sat on the throne of France once more, but the empire I ruled was a ghost. The ministers who filed into my office spoke in careful tones, their eyes avoiding mine. The reports piled on my desk told the truth they wouldn't. The treasury was empty. The arsenals were bare. My Grande Armée, that magnificent machine that had conquered Europe, was scattered across 100 graveyards from Madrid to Moscow. What I had now were boys. Teenagers who'd never held a musket. Veterans so old they wheezed climbing stairs. And officers who smiled to my face while their hands trembled, already calculating their escape routes. "The people love you, sire," Davout said, standing rigid as always. "But love doesn't pay for gunpowder." I stared at the map spread before me. Every crowned head in Europe had united against me. Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain, even the smaller kingdoms, terrified of what my return meant, pledged their armies to the coalition. 700,000 men, all marching toward France. I had perhaps 200,000, maybe. "Then we don't wait for them to arrive," I said. "We strike first, fast, before they can combine their forces." The old magic, you see. The Napoleon of Austerlitz, of Jena. Hit them before they're ready, shatter them piece by piece, make them fear the legend more than the army. But as I spoke, I felt it, the gap between what I was and what I had been. My mind still worked with the speed of genius. My body betrayed me with every breath. The weeks blurred together. I rebuilt an army from smoke and memory. Conscription notices went out. Forges burned day and night. I worked 18 hours, then 20, sleeping in chairs, eating at my desk, driving myself and everyone around me toward a single goal. One more victory, one more miracle. The people cheered when I rode through Paris. They waved tricolors and shouted my name. But I saw it in their eyes too. The exhaustion, the fear. They wanted glory, Yes, but they also wanted peace. France was tired, and so was I. Ney visited me late one night in April. He looked older, harder, haunted. "The men will fight for you, sire," he said quietly. "But they remember Russia. They remember Leipzig. They're brave, but they're not stupid." "Then we make them believe again," I said. "One decisive battle. We destroy Wellington and Blucher before they unite, and the coalition collapses. Show them the old fire, Michel. Show them why we conquered the world." He nodded, but his eyes held something I'd never seen before: doubt. By June, my army was as ready as it would ever be. I held reviews, inspected regiments, gave speeches about honor and France and destiny. The veterans cheered. The boys looked terrified and proud. I gave the order to march north, into Belgium, where Wellington waited with his Anglo-Allied force, where Blucher gathered his Prussians, where fate had prepared my final stage. As we crossed the border, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, black, heavy, pregnant with rain. I watched them roll toward us and thought, even the sky knows what's coming. June 15th, 1815. We crossed into Belgium like a blade through silk. The plan was perfect. It existed in my mind with crystalline clarity, the same vision that had won me 50 battles. Split Wellington and Blucher before they could unite. Destroy them separately. Make Europe kneel one final time. My army moved fast, faster than the coalition expected. We caught them off guard, just like the old days. I could feel it building. That momentum, that inevitability, that used to follow me like a shadow. But something was wrong. The dispatches came back confused, contradictory. Ney reported Wellington's position, then contradicted himself an hour later. My cavalry screens missed Blucher's movements. Officers I'd relied on for decades suddenly seemed slow, hesitant, making decisions a heartbeat too late. And my body. God, my body. I couldn't sit a horse for more than an hour without agony shooting through my stomach. Had to dismount, pace, wait for the pain to subside while my marshals exchanged glances they thought I couldn't see. "Sire, perhaps we should wait for," someone began. "We wait for nothing," I snapped. "Speed is everything. Every hour we delay, they grow stronger." June 16th, Ligny, the Prussians. I found Blucher's army, and I broke it. 30,000 casualties. The old Prussian himself crushed beneath his horse, barely escaping. It should have been decisive. It should have been the beginning of everything. But as I surveyed the field at sunset, watching the Prussians retreat, I felt no triumph, only exhaustion, and the nagging certainty that they weren't destroyed, just wounded, still dangerous. "Grouchy," I called to my marshal. "Take 30,000 men, pursue the Prussians. Keep them away from Wellington. Do not let them reunite." He saluted and rode off. I watched him go. And for a moment, just a moment, I wanted to call him back, to give more explicit orders, to make absolutely certain he understood. But I was so tired, and there were 100 other decisions pressing on me. I let him go. That same day, Ney fought Wellington at Quatre Bras, a confused, bloody mess of a battle. Ney attacked without coordination, pulled back when he should have pressed, then charged again with cavalry alone, wasting men, wasting time, wasting opportunity. When his report reached me, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Michel Ney, the bravest of the brave, was broken. The man who'd held the rear guard in Russia, who'd led charge after charge across Europe, was fighting like a desperate animal, instead of a Marshal of France. Then came June 17th, the rain. It started in the afternoon, a few drops, then a drizzle, then a deluge that turned the world into a nightmare of mud and water. The roads became rivers. The fields became swamps. My artillery, those beautiful bronze cannons that had won me empires, sank to their axles. We had to stop, make camp near a ridge the locals called Mont Saint-Jean, just south of a village named Waterloo. I stood in my tent that night, listening to the rain hammer the canvas, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. Not to God. I'd stopped believing in God somewhere between Moscow and Leipzig. But to fate, to destiny, to whatever force had lifted me from Corsican obscurity to master of Europe. "One more day," I whispered. "Give me one more day of sun. Let the ground dry. Let me move my guns." Outside, thunder rolled across the Belgian countryside, and the rain fell harder. June 18th, 1815, dawn. I woke to silence. The rain had stopped, but the damage was done. I walked out of my tent and stared at the field. A sea of mud, thick, clinging, treacherous. My cannon would sink with every shot. My cavalry would struggle for every meter. The mathematical precision I'd built my career on. Speed, maneuver, artillery coordination. All of it compromised by water and earth. Across the valley, on the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean, Wellington waited. I could see his lines through my telescope. Solid, disciplined. The British infantry in their red coats, formed up behind the ridge's crest where my guns couldn't reach them easily. The bastard had chosen his ground perfectly. "When do we attack, sire?" Ney asked. His eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept. I checked my watch, 9 a.m. Every instinct screamed to wait. Let the sun dry the ground. Let my artillery breathe. But where was Grouchy? Where were the Prussians? The dispatch I'd received said he was pursuing them east, away from the battlefield. Good. That meant a knot formed in my stomach. Something felt wrong. "We attack at 11, I said, "once the ground firms up. And if Blücher comes, he won't. Grouchy has him. And even if he tries, he's 30 kilometers away. We'll crush Wellington long before the Prussians arrive." I said it with certainty, but my hands were shaking again. 11:30 a.m. The guns opened fire. 80 pieces of artillery, the largest concentration I could mass, thundered against Wellington's ridge. The ground shook. Smoke rolled across the valley. It should have been devastating, but the mud absorbed the impact. Cannonballs that should have bounced through infantry lines buried themselves uselessly in the soft earth. And Wellington's men, hidden behind the ridge, waited in relative safety. I felt time slipping through my fingers like water. "Advance," I ordered. D'Erlon's corps, 18,000 men, marched down into the valley and up toward the British lines. Drums beating, eagles raised. The old Imperial infantry doing what they'd done 100 times before. Wellington's guns opened up, then his muskets. The range was perfect. His volley fire was mechanical, relentless. My men died by the hundreds, but they pushed forward, reached the ridge, began to fight hand to hand. For a moment, one glorious moment, I thought we'd break them. Then British cavalry countercharged. Heavy dragoons smashing into my infantry's exposed flanks. Durland's corpse reeled, broke, came streaming back down the hill in chaos. 4,000 casualties. In minutes, I closed my eyes, took a breath. The pain in my stomach was a living thing now, clawing at me. "Sire," an aide approached, his face pale. "Reports from the east. Prussian scouts have been spotted." "No, not yet. Not now." "How far?" "Perhaps 2 hours." I looked at Wellington's ridge, still intact, still waiting. 2 hours. I had 2 hours to break the British before Blucher's entire army arrived and crushed my flank. "Marshal Ney," I called. My voice was steady. Inside, I was screaming, "Take the cavalry! Break their center! Do it now!" Ney's face transformed. Finally, a clear order. Finally, action. He gathered 5,000 horsemen, the finest cavalry in Europe, and led them personally up that muddy slope toward Wellington's guns. I watched through my telescope as they charged again, and again, and again. Without infantry support, without artillery preparation. Just horses and sabers and desperation. The British formed squares, unbreakable walls of bayonets. My cavalry shattered against them like waves against cliffs. Ney's horse was shot from under him. He found another, charged again. "Michel, stop," I whispered, but he couldn't hear me. Couldn't stop. He'd gone mad, and the Prussians were coming. 4 p.m. The world was ending in fire and smoke. Ney had thrown away my cavalry. Thousands of horsemen lay dead or broken on Wellington's ridge. The British squares held. Every charge, every desperate assault, repulsed. And from the east, like the wrath of God itself, the Prussians came. I saw their columns emerging through the trees. Blücher, that old beast. Wounded at Ligny, he should have been retreating to Germany. Instead, he'd marched through the night, through pain, through hell itself to be here. Grouchy was nowhere. 30,000 men chasing ghosts while my empire died. I had to pull troops from my center to face the Prussian onslaught. The village of Platsinois became a slaughterhouse. My young guard, boys most of them, fought house to house, room to room, dying to buy me minutes. Minutes I no longer knew how to use. "Sire, we must withdraw," someone said. I don't remember who. While we still can, no. My voice sounded distant, hollow. We break Wellington first. One final push. I had one card left. The Imperial Guard, my elite. The men who'd never broken, never retreated, never failed me in 20 years of war. 8 battalions, veterans, the best soldiers in the world. I watched them form up, these men who'd followed me from Egypt to Moscow. Their faces were hard, weathered, beautiful. They didn't look afraid. They looked at me with something worse than fear. Pity. "The guard advances," I ordered. They marched up that cursed ridge into the smoke, drums beating the pas de charge, the rhythm that had terrified Europe. Wellington waited until they were 50 meters away. Then his guards' brigade, hidden in the wheat, rose up and fired. Point blank, devastating, surgical. My guards staggered, fired back, pressed forward. And then, something I'd never seen, never imagined possible. They stopped, wavered, began to fall back. "La garde recule!" someone screamed. "The guard retreats." That's when the army broke. Not slowly, not with dignity. It shattered like glass. Regiments that had fought all day suddenly realized what that cry meant. If the guard retreats, nothing is sacred. Nothing is safe. Panic swept through my lines like wildfire. Men threw down their weapons and ran. Officers tried to rally them and were trampled. The eagles, those sacred standards, fell into the mud. I sat on my horse, watching the collapse, and I felt nothing. No rage, no despair, just a vast, cold emptiness. This was how it ended. Not with glory, not with genius, with mud and mistakes, and the simple arithmetic of too few men against too many. Ney appeared beside me, unhorsed again, covered in blood and powder burns. His face was a mask of anguish. "Sire, we must leave, now." I looked at him. This man who'd been braver than God, now broken, defeated, human. "France," I whispered. "What have I done to France?" He grabbed my bridle and pulled. My guard formed around us, a shrinking circle of loyalty in an ocean of rout. We fled. The Emperor of France, the master of Europe. Running through the darkness, while the British and Prussians hunted us like animals. Behind me, Waterloo burned, and with it, everything I'd ever been. June 21st, Paris. I entered the city like a ghost, returning to haunt its own grave. No cheers, no crowds, just silence and averted eyes. The same people who'd wept with joy 3 months ago now hurried past, pretending not to see me. The Chamber of Deputies met without me. I could hear their voices through the walls. Angry, frightened, already calculating how to survive what came next. "Napoleon must abdicate," someone declared. "He's brought ruin upon France." I sat alone in my study at the Élysée Palace and laughed. A dry, bitter sound. Ruin. As if France hadn't been glorious under me. As if I hadn't taken them from revolution's chaos to an empire that made kings tremble. But glory has a short memory. Defeat is all they see now. Fouché came to visit. The spider himself, always surviving, always scheming. "Sire," he said, not meeting my eyes. "The chamber demands your abdication. If you refuse, they'll declare you an outlaw. Civil war will follow. Let it come. Your Majesty, I fought the world, Fouché. I can fight France too." He looked at me then, and I saw something like genuine sadness in those calculating eyes. "No, sire, you can't. Not anymore." He was right. I had no army, no allies. Even Ney had disappeared, fled or arrested, I didn't know. My marshals had melted away like snow in spring. I was alone. June 22nd, I signed the abdication. My hand didn't shake. I'd grown used to surrender by then. "Few my son," I wrote. "Napoleon II, Emperor of the French." They ignored it, of course. Brought back the Bourbons within weeks. Fat Louis XVIII waddling back onto the throne as if he'd won something. I thought about running. America, perhaps. Starting over in the new world. But I was so tired. July 15th, I surrendered to Captain Maitland of HMS Bellerophon. The British, my oldest enemies. Perhaps they'd respect me more than my own people. "I come to claim the protection of British law," I told him. Like Themistocles, I seat myself at the hearth of the British people. Themistocles, another general betrayed by those he'd saved. They didn't give me asylum. They gave me a prison. St. Helena, a rock in the South Atlantic, even more remote than Elba. This time, there would be no escape. As the ship carried me away from Europe, I stood on deck and watched the horizon swallow France. Somewhere behind me lay Waterloo, Austerlitz, Jena, Moscow, 100 battlefields painted with glory and blood. I'd conquered nations, crowned myself, rewritten the map of Europe, made kings kiss my boots and emperors beg for peace. And I'd lost it all to mud, rain, and a Prussian who refused to stay beaten. Was it fate? I asked the empty sea. Or was it me? The waves had no answer. I thought about my son, the King of Rome. Would he remember his father? Would history? Of course it would. How could it forget? I'd risen too high, burned too bright, fallen too far. Men would speak my name with awe and horror for centuries. I'd wanted to unite Europe, to bring enlightenment, law, order to a continent of feudal chaos. Instead, I'd become a cautionary tale. The eagle who flew too close to the sun, the genius who forgot he was mortal, the emperor who conquered everything except his own ambition. I turned away from Europe and faced the endless Atlantic. Behind me, empire. Ahead, exile, illness, slow death in shadows. But the legend would live forever. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was all I'd ever really wanted. The tragedy of Napoleon is not his defeat at Waterloo. It's that he believed destiny was a promise, not a gamble. I rose from nothing, a Corsican boy with an accent, mocked by French aristocrats, dismissed as provincial and crude. I became emperor through will and genius alone. Every victory taught me the same lesson. I was chosen, special, beyond the rules that governed ordinary men. Austerlitz, Jena, Friedland. I didn't just win battles. I rewrote military science. Kings studied my campaigns. Philosophers wrote about my mind. I became myth while still breathing. And myths don't die on muddy fields in Belgium. Except they do. The rain at Waterloo wasn't divine punishment. It was weather. Ney's madness wasn't betrayal. It was exhaustion. Grouchy's absence wasn't conspiracy. It was confusion. I lost because I was human. Because genius can't overcome logistics. Because one man, no matter how brilliant, cannot bend an entire continent to his will forever. But I refused to see it. Even as my body failed, even as my marshals doubted, even as France bled, I believed the story I told myself, that I was inevitable, that destiny owed me victory. Pride, the oldest sin, the one that fells giants. Here is what I learned in the darkness of St. Helena. Too late to matter. Greatness is not a shield against mortality. Genius is not immunity from consequence. And the higher you rise, the more catastrophic the fall. Not because the gods are jealous, but because you've forgotten the ground exists. I wanted to be remembered forever. I achieved it, but not as the enlightened lawgiver I imagined. As a warning, a reminder that ambition unchecked becomes tyranny, that glory pursued without wisdom leads to ruin, that even emperors are just men, playing at being gods until fate calls their bluff. Would I change anything? No, because legends aren't built on caution. They're built on men who dare everything and lose spectacularly. I conquered Europe. I touched the sun. And yes, I burned. But what a beautiful fire it was.